All right, you guys, so we're gonna go back in here in a little bit and pull some of the paint off of the surface. I wanted to kind of finish up, wrap up on a few things. So let's take some of that paper towel again with some of the water. And I felt some of the areas were a little bit flat, so I'm gonna pull some paint off. It'd be kind of hard to pick up on some of the specific details due to the distance of the camera, but hopefully as we get some other shots, you'll be able to see a better idea as to what this looks like. So right now it's just picking up some of that paint, moving it around, especially areas that feel a little bit clustered and jumbled. I can pick this paper towel, move it around a little bit here, revealing some more of the canvas. It also gives it a little bit more sense of volume. Slight lift. It kind of softens the edges up as well too. Blends it really well into the canvas. A little bit of lift right here as well too. Any parts along the clouds, I can kind of soften the edges. The next step I'm going to be going for after I kind of move a little bit with the paper towel is to go with a smaller brush and hit some of the shadow shapes, minor details, grouping some leftover areas. So this is just a really quick lift. Nothing too specific, nothing too heavy just yet. But let's take a smaller brush. Move with a small flat. And we'll start playing with some smaller areas. Let's go into the eyes initially. And these are all just kind of small things I'm doing now to kind of fill in some of the white spots of the canvas. Any sort of leftover parts. And I'm going to experiment a little bit because we are going to bring in some marker as well too. And that will help kind of maybe adjust some of the slight drop shadows, value adjustments. And going back in there still, kind of grouping some parts, small little elements. I want to re-establish some of the stripes, kind of in this tiger print. Right in those areas, just a little bit. Same thing, just some of the shadow shapes now. Using combination more of an ultramarine with a bit of burnt umber, gives me my darks. Push these values down. Still just moving the paint as if I'm still kind of drawing with it. Let's go in there and start to hit up some of the parts in the head and the face. Just a slight darker value. Drop shadow areas. As we lifted some of the paint off, around it, kind of pushing it a bit dark. Do some color shift as well too. Some of the warms and the reds, kind of around the ears. Getting some of that color within the skin. And so that way it's not just a flat, kind of just yellow to gray. A little bit of pigment, saturations, pinks, reds dropped in. Kind of thinking of it where blood would rush to the surface of areas. And shifting around again still, going back into maybe some of the materials of the clothing or the jewelry. The very last step I'll be doing is maybe using some of the highlights, a gouache paint. And that'll bring in some of the more brighter areas of where light sources are. Again, still hitting some of those shadow shapes, small areas, small spots. Right along the weapon underneath. Getting some accents and details along this area, a lot of gesture, brush strokes. Again, still going to use that kind of lifting technique in some areas and parts. Just pull a little bit, pull a little bit. I'm really liking this pull technique. It just kind of helps blend some parts together. Let's go into the background, just the last round of it. And this will be to basically just kind of gradiate from the outside to the center. And I'm going to group and overlap in some areas as well too. The first wash is so light, it doesn't do so much. But parts like this all the way down here, I don't want to leave it just white either. So I'm going to overlap some of that paint right on top. And I'm trying to drop the values down. And so that way everything is centered up and towards the head. So this continues to move, using a lot of water still. Again, grouping it together. Because we don't need all this white. All we need is that focusing right in there. So as a transparent medium, as watercolor is, as long as you control the water concentration, a lot of stuff underneath that I had done will remain, and you won't lose it. gradient as it comes up. Same thing, using the paper towel, pick up a couple parts, move it around a little bit, adding some texture. But keeping it right to the top. A couple little spots with the top right here in the clouds. Slight lift, slight lift. And again, just cutting away, movements of the brush strokes. We're just touching up on a couple last spots over here. I'm gonna switch it up over to a different material. We're gonna use some marker, and we'll see how it goes. This particular marker brand is Olo, and I have a whole collection of samples in here. It's a brand new company, and I've used many other type of marker brands in the past. This will be a bit of an experiment because as a water-based medium, you would usually stick with the watercolor all the way through, but we're going to try some of the marker stuff. This is alcohol-based, so it's not going to necessarily take apart the image. It'll blend with the watercolor a little bit, but I think it should be fine. So let's just play with it. So I'm going to choose some of the different color sets. This is a cool gray. Now it's more specific in terms of how the brush strokes go on. I want a slightly darker value. This is a cool gray 7. So I can now go in there and be much more controlled about my strokes and individual lines with the marker. Now again, with the marker, as an individual stroke, it's obviously very line heavy. So what I can do is bring in the other marker, a slightly lighter value, and because it's alcohol based, I can blend the edges. So as I blend it, it works into the watercolor really well. There's not a mismatch in terms of things like surface quality, saturation of colors, application. The marker and the watercolor actually go really well together. Now, I would normally recommend you start with the watercolor first for just general strokes and application. Go to more specific things like the marker afterwards, later on. Same thing, going back up into the watercolor, using the marker, slightly darker, lighter value, blending it up a little bit. And just kind of going back and forth, blending the markers together. So what the great thing with the Olo is that if I want to now do this, I could take apart the Olo marker. So if I just want these two values, I can now mix it. This is a connector piece in between. And I link them together. So now I have the two values that I want. So I'll use one side, flip it to the other end, blend. So this will give me the nice dark value to kind of give me some of the edge control, the contrast, to help separate more information, but still really give it that kind of watercolor-like feel, even though we're using a alcohol-based marker. Again, this is not something that's a normal technique for myself, but in these kind of opportunities for live drawing, larger pieces, multi-medium, I'll try multiple things. If it fails, but a lot of times, I'm usually able to make it work. So because this is kind of more of a general cool marker, I can apply it throughout most of the image. And because it's the alcohol that's wet, it actually will mix in with the watercolor a little bit as well too. Now, unfortunately, with the alcohol, I can't do the lifting technique. It'll be permanent. So this is why this is the last step you should go for. So once we now start to put some marker on there, you got to make sure that's what you want. Again, pushing in between some spaces. Especially some of the shadow areas have a lot of speckled white from the canvas. Using the marker, I kind of group it, lose some of that noise. And still blend. Go back up into the head. A few parts around. And I'm going to bring in another material. So we have now 4 different materials: ink, watercolor, marker, and then gouache. So this is truly a multi-medium piece. I think the last step will be a little bit of pen work on top, just for some line work if needed. Clean up some of the line work edges, details, hatching. But again, all my concentration right now is going up to the top portion. All this stuff down here, softer, looser, rough, I keep it that way. Concentration of highlights, detail right up in here. Blend. Gradations, shifts of color. Let's play with some other markers though. I kind of want that gold of the rod over here. So let's choose some of the yellows or oranges and see if we can actually influence it a little bit. Same thing, kind of blending it in. So I shift the color, especially if I lose saturation. The marker I can do this really easily with. But let's go into the gouache now. Now this gouache is more of an opaque paint. So I'm going to go in there in between.
What paint is that you're using now then?
This is gouache paint.
Okay.
So gouache paint is a water-based medium, high pigment, so it's super opaque, where watercolor is a transparent medium. So I use watercolor first because I can build the layers. Gouache will sit on top of that. Yeah. The only issue with watercolor or gouache is that if you apply water on top of that again, it'll reactivate the paint. So it's a little bit finicky. So this will build that opacity. I can go on top of the lines, give you more of a painterly feel.
Yeah, quite loose.
Yeah.
I like that.
So especially again, areas of where I want that contrast, dark to light. Yep. So I add a little bit of yellow in here. I never use 100% white. I never use 100% black in paint. A little bit of yellow or a little bit of cool, and that kind of pushes it in color.
Will you go back in at the end and put in more darker outlines on it? Or
Sometimes I can, especially if I lose some areas, I will definitely touch upon. Yeah. But I've also decided the fact that I want this to be more of a drawing with
it's
color.
sketchiness, some
Exactly.
style to it, so-
But you can also go full painting if you want to, but that's your choice.
Gives it that more of a look when it's a little bit more not so perfect.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah. With painting, or either way, lost edges and hard edges balance that. Because over refined things can feel a bit too sharp and flat. Lost edges and kind of roughness to it is a lot of fun. So.
Yeah. Very inspiring.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. So now we're just moving that paint around. Just making sure that head really pops. And then we just blend. The great thing is that the gouache and watercolor really mix well together. They're both water mediums. So they cross-pollinate real nicely. We definitely still will bring in a little bit of line around some areas to clarify some parts, but for now, this is one of the last steps we're doing, and we're almost done. Now that light source coming this direction.
Lights on, oh, it's great. But what a difference with just that colour, just that little bit on there. It's
Yep.
beautiful. Crazy, isn't it, how one little touch can change something? Like,
You don't need much.
no.
Subtlety is everything.
Yeah.
That's why we just going for the highlights.
Yeah.
It's like it pops the whole picture.
Oh man. Like even just doing that on them bracelets has like changed it, really.
With
So
this-
when you find that you'll do like most white at the end then
Yeah.
of the piece, so you
Yeah.
don't like, is it like, so you just don't mix up the colours with it? Is that
Not
another
too
thing
much,
with
but
watercolours?
painting order wise, we tend to go mid-tone to darks and then the highlights last.
You said mid, dark, and then highlight.
Yeah. So in lighting situations and like photography also, as light comes in from certain directions, there's specular light, you have your mid-tone, and then your shadow transitions. So we have different type of shadows we can use. Form shadows move shadows around the form. Cast shadows are shadows cast by the object. So we'll let this dry for a little bit. I'm not going to overwork it too much. Maybe a couple of spots here and there just to kind of bring up a bit of dry brushing. This is where that dry brush now comes up, where I want the canvas texture to kind of come through, like in small these areas over here. So I'm just kind of grazing on top of the surface, lightly. Not a lot of wet paint. No more water. And now it's all about just texture. So we're gonna come back with the pen. And we can go in there in some of the areas just to kind of wrap things up a little bit tighter. Any lost points?
What pen is it you're using there?
Oh, this is just a standard, it's called a Fude pen. Yeah, a brush pen. Let's use a bit of a broader one. This is the MB.
Man, it looks incredible.
But I'm not gonna try to clarify too much. I want some parts to be lost. I want some parts to be rough. But just right there, just on the edges, we'll push. $1. I think we're almost done here. All we got to do now is sign it. We'll put it right here. That's it. So this was completed in just 2 days. First day was just the line work. That was about an hour and a half, 2 hours. Watercolor we started this morning. So this has been about maybe, what, 2 hours worth of work, possibly, maybe less or more. So a combination of this full painting was maybe within the 5-6 hour period, but spread out through days. But as a live piece, adapting a lot of reinterpretation, being able to move and adapt, with materials as well. Multi-mediums are hard to balance, but also just to have fun. Whatever came out here, it doesn't really matter, good or bad. It was just fun to do. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. And Monsterpalooza, thank you guys for hosting. And Plastic Cell as well too with our neighbors. Come check us out next year as well too.